The story begins not with a clash of armies, but with a misunderstanding so profound that it reshaped the battlefield. In the vast and violent canvas of World War II, every weapon, every machine, every calculation mattered. But sometimes, the difference between life and death came down to what one side thought they knew and what they never expected. Across the forests and farmlands of Europe, the German 88mm crews believed they understood every Allied tank they faced. They trusted their guns, they trusted their training, and they trusted the terrifying reputation of the 8.8 centimeters pack and flak weapons, the same guns that had shattered entire armored formations from North Africa to the Eastern Front. To them, an American Sherman was a formality, a target they had destroyed 100 times before. Thin armor, high profile, predictable silhouette, but then something appeared in the distance that did not behave like anything they had seen. Something that refused to die. Something that kept coming. The M4A3E2 Jumbo? A tank the German gunners didn't even know existed, and certainly not one with 7 inches of frontal armor. But to understand how this armored anomaly caught the Germans off guard, we have to step backward to a time when the United States Army was scrambling to solve a problem that kept getting its men killed. In 1944, the Sherman was the workhorse of the Allied advance. Reliable, fast, easy to repair, and built in staggering numbers. But despite its strengths, it had a flaw so well known that German tankers joked about it around campfires. The Sherman burned easily, and its armor was no match for heavy German weapons. The Panther's long 75 and the Tiger's 88 could tear through a Sherman at ranges the American crews could hardly reply to. The men inside those steel coffins knew it. They felt it every time they rolled forward into the unknown. The American High Command, aware of the mounting casualties, needed a way to push through fortified German positions, towns turned into strongholds, villages laced with anti-tank guns, roadblocks guarded by Panthers waiting in ambush. The Sherman was fast, but it wasn't built for punching head-on through walls of fire. So the solution was improvised, rushed, and built under the pressure of a war that demanded results now. Engineers thickened the armor far beyond what the Sherman's frame was ever meant to carry. Extra steel plates were welded on the hull, new armor slabs cast for the turret, and internal reinforcements added until the tank became something entirely different. The soldiers who first saw it gave it a nickname instantly: Jumbo. This was no subtle modification. The Jumbo looked heavy. It felt heavy. It was over 42 tons of stubborn American steel, lumbering ahead like a bulldog that didn't understand the meaning of retreat. The armor on the front hull reached 178 millimeters, nearly 7 full inches thicker than most German heavy tanks. It was the heaviest armored vehicle the Americans had put into frontline service. Yet the German intelligence officers didn't have a clue it existed. Not a drawing, not a photograph, not a dossier, nothing. This absence of intelligence wasn't just a minor oversight, it was a deadly blind spot. On a battlefield where knowing your enemy meant everything, the Jumbo was a ghost, an armored mystery that would roll up to German positions and behave in ways they could not explain. Imagine the shock. A German 88mm crew spots a Sherman silhouette moving at the edge of a ruined French village. They've destroyed dozens just like it. They know the ranges, they know the angles. The gun commander calls the shot. The loader sends the shell home. The gun recoils with a familiar thunder, and the shell hits. But the tank does not explode. It does not burn. It does not even slow down. This is where the psychological war began, the silent panic, as crews quickly reloaded, fired again, and watched in disbelief as the strange, stubborn Sherman absorbed the hit and kept advancing. The training manuals told them a Sherman should not survive that. The battlefield told a different story. But before those moments of shock and disbelief, before the Germans realized they were dealing with something new, the Jumbo had to take shape in the factories back home. It was a product of urgency, a weapon born out of the harsh lessons learned in the bocage of Normandy and the hedgerows where American armor was repeatedly chewed apart. These tanks were not built in huge numbers. Fewer than 260 were ever made, but they were sent to exactly the places where American soldiers needed them most. Places where the enemy dug in deep, where roads were covered by deadly guns, where someone had to take the first hit so everyone else could follow. And when those first shots came, the Jumbo's survival changed everything. Suddenly, the Americans had a tank that could lead assaults instead of hanging back. Engineers could follow behind it, Infantry could move under its shadow. Columns could push forward into areas once considered death traps. It didn't matter that the Jumbo was slow or that it strained its engine under the massive weight. What mattered was that when it rolled forward, men behind it felt safer. They trusted it. They knew it would take the punishment meant for them. Meanwhile, miles away in German positions, 88mm crews still believed they understood every Sherman crossing the field. They didn't know a new beast had entered the fight. They didn't know that the familiar outline now hid a monster plated in steel so thick their guns, the same guns that had once been seen as unstoppable, were suddenly not enough. And because they didn't know, they kept firing with confidence. Confidence that was about to be shattered. The first encounters came quietly, almost by accident, buried in the chaos of the Allied push across France. A column of American armor approached a crossroads under German observation. Hidden in the tree line, an 88mm crew waited with the calm confidence of veterans who had seen Shermans fall all day long. They didn't know they were staring at a tank built to rewrite that expectation. The tank at the front of the column looked familiar, the same rounded hull shape, the same tall turret. To the German gunners, this was the easiest shot of the day. The commander called the range, the gunner lined up the sight, and the loader shoved a high-velocity round into the chamber. The blast echoed across the valley. A perfect hit, and yet the tank kept moving, its tracks grinding forward through the dust like nothing had happened. For a moment, the German crew thought the shell must have glanced off a slope. They adjusted, they fired again. Another hit, another explosion of sparks and dust. Still, the tank came on, slow and stubborn, like a beast that felt no pain. Inside that tank, the American crew felt the thunder of the impacts ringing through the steel walls. But they also felt something else, the reassuring, almost unreal realization that the armor was holding. It was doing what no Sherman had ever done before. It was protecting them from a weapon their fathers would have said was impossible to survive. That day, the German gun crew fell back from their position, abandoning their gun rather than face a tank that refused to be destroyed. They never learned exactly what they had encountered. The report simply noted, enemy tank absorbed direct hits from 8.8cm gun, identified as Sherman variant, armor unexpectedly heavy. This would not be the last such report. Word spread through German lines, not through official channels, but through whispers. There was talk of a new Sherman that did not die, a lumbering brute that soaked up shells and kept pushing forward. Some dismissed these rumors as exaggerations told by frightened troops. But the truth was, far stranger, the Germans genuinely had no intelligence on the Jumbo. No photographs, no armor thickness tables, nothing to warn them that the familiar American silhouette had evolved into something far more dangerous. Among American units, the Jumbo quickly developed a reputation of its own. Infantrymen loved it. Tank crews fought over who got to drive it. Officers requested it for every assault, every street fight, every town threatened by hidden anti-tank guns. It became the point man, the steel shield that led the way when everyone else hesitated. Allied soldiers described the strange sensation of walking behind the Jumbo as it absorbed fire meant for them. One crewman wrote in his journal, "It feels like following a battleship through a storm. You hear the shells hitting it, but you somehow believe you'll be safe as long as you stay close." But what made the Jumbo so effective wasn't just raw armor. It was also the fact that its enemies didn't recognize it. German gunners often assumed they were firing at a standard Sherman, expecting the same easy kill. When their shots bounced or sank harmlessly into the thickened front hull, they wasted precious seconds trying to understand what had gone wrong. In a battle where seconds could mean the difference between life and death, those moments of confusion were catastrophic. Tank crews shifted to armor-piercing rounds designed for heavier targets, but by then the Jumbo was already closing the distance. At close range, even the strongest German guns struggled to find a weak spot on the tank's heavily plated front. Some crews aimed for the tracks or the turret ring, desperate for any chance at stopping the advance. There are recorded moments where the German crews simply gave up firing at the front and waited for a side shot, a rare opportunity, because Jumbo crews were trained to angle their armor or pivot toward incoming fire. The tank's commander usually made sure the thickest part of the armor faced the enemy at all times, turning the Jumbo into a shield capable of shrugging off blows that would have shredded a normal Sherman. And then there was the moment that became legend. During the fierce fighting around the town of Kammerscheid in the Wirken forest, an American Jumbo took round after round from German guns, including direct hits from Panthers and anti-tank cannons. Crews watching from cover could hardly believe their eyes. Shells sparked off the armor, dirt sprayed into the air, and the Jumbo just kept going. The Germans, unaware of its true armor thickness, fired again and again, unable to comprehend why their shells were failing. After the battle, American soldiers counted the impact marks. Some say there were over a dozen hits on the front alone. Yet the tank survived. The psychological shift this created cannot be overstated. For years, American tankers had been the ones afraid, the ones who felt outmatched by the superior guns and thicker armor of German machines. But now, with the Jumbo leading the charge, the balance of fear began to change. German gunners started hesitating. They spent extra seconds trying to identify whether the Sherman in their sight was the invincible kind. Some crews fired at the turret cheeks, hoping those areas were thinner. Others cursed their luck when shells bounced with a sharp metallic ring instead of the expected explosion. Interestingly, even though the Jumbo was incredibly rare, barely a couple hundred tanks across the entire front, the confusion it created made German crews overestimate how common it was. Reports began to exaggerate the numbers, claiming entire units of heavily armored Shermans were appearing. In reality, most units had only one Jumbo, sometimes two, leading a column of standard Shermans that stayed carefully behind. One of the most overlooked facts is that the Jumbo's existence changed German behavior even when it wasn't present. Anti-tank crews became cautious. They waited longer before engaging. They repositioned more frequently. They wasted high-value ammunition on tanks that weren't actually Jumbos, simply because they feared they might be. The psychological effect became a weapon of its own. The tank was never meant to be a breakthrough design. It wasn't intended to duel Panthers or challenge Tigers in open fields. But the mere fact that German crews didn't know its specifications, didn't know it carried armor almost as thick as a Tiger's front, gave it an impact far greater than its small numbers suggested. This secrecy wasn't planned. It was simply a byproduct of wartime confusion. The Americans didn't go out of their way to hide the Jumbo. They just didn't have enough of them for the Germans to capture or study. And so battle after battle unfolded with German gunners learning the truth the hard way, one ricochet at a time. But the Jumbo wasn't invincible. Its extra armor made it slow, sluggish on hills, and difficult to maneuver in tight spaces. German commanders eventually learned how to counter it not by frontal shots, but through ambushes, artillery, and mines. Still, every time it appeared, it forced the enemy to rethink their strategy. As the war dragged on and the Allies pushed toward Germany's heart, the Jumbo became a symbol of resilience. A strange and unexpected answer to a question the Americans had struggled with since the first Shermans burned in Normandy. By the winter of 1944, the German High Command finally began piecing together clues from the battlefield. A handful of after-action reports described assault tanks or Shermans with reinforced armor. But it was too little, too late. The real understanding only came after the war, when captured American vehicles were studied in detail. And yet, even then, some German veterans refused to believe the armor was truly 7 inches thick. They insisted it must have been angled steel or spaced plating. The truth simply seemed unbelievable to men who spent years trusting the power of their 88 seconds. The legend continued to grow long after the fighting ended. The Americans remembered the Jumbo as a guardian. The Germans remembered it as a puzzle they never solved in time. And historians, even decades later, still marvel at how such a small number of tanks created such an oversized impact. But the story doesn't end here. Because the real turning point, the moment where everything the Germans believed shattered in a single terrifying encounter, was yet to come. The final turning point came in the cold winter months, when the war in Europe reached its most desperate stage. The skies were gray, the roads frozen, and the forests thick with the smoke of artillery. This was the moment Germany launched its last great gamble, a massive counterattack through the quiet Ardennes, where they hoped to break the Allied line and turn defeat into something they could bargain with. American tank units scrambled to respond. Among the exhausted crews were a handful of Jumbos, pushed forward to block German spearheads that sliced through villages and forests like steel blades. They were thrown into the line not because they were perfect, but because they were dependable and because, time and time again, they had proven they could take hits the others could not. One of these Jumbos rolled toward a small Belgian crossroads at dawn, its engine rumbling like a distant storm. The village was silent, but the silence felt wrong. The crew knew an ambush was waiting somewhere, yet their orders were simple: hold the crossroads at all costs. If they failed, an entire company of infantry behind them would be exposed. Inside the German lines, the defenders were ready. Hidden behind a collapsed barn sat an 88mm gun, its long barrel pointed directly at the road. When they saw the familiar outline of a Sherman emerge from the morning fog, the German commander did not hesitate. He had stopped dozens of these tanks before. He believed this one would be no different. The order was given. The gun fired. The shells screamed across the field. The first hit threw sparks off the Jumbo's thickened hull. The tank rocked back, but it did not stop. The German crew froze, stunned by the result. They reloaded faster, fired again, a second blast, then a third. Still, the tank advanced. The American crew felt every impact like a hammer against their ribs, but they pushed forward, trusting the armor that wrapped around them. Over the radio, infantrymen cheered them on, convinced they were watching a miracle. But inside the tank, there was no miracle, only courage and steel doing exactly what they were built to do. The Jumbo kept rolling until it reached the edge of the village. Its turret swung. Its main gun fired. The explosion ripped through the German position, sending the 88mm crew scrambling for cover. They had spent the entire engagement believing the Sherman in their sights was just like all the others. They had no idea they were staring at the heaviest armored vehicle the Americans had ever put into combat. After the battle, when the smoke finally cleared, soldiers found the Jumbo riddled with dents and scars. The front armor looked like a giant's hammer had beaten on it for hours. Some impacts had warped the steel. Others left deep craters. But none had penetrated. The crew climbed out shaken but alive, knowing they had survived something most Sherman crews never would. And the men who witnessed it carried the story with them for the rest of their lives. One infantryman later wrote, "That tank was hit so many times, we stopped counting, but it refused to die. It was the closest thing to invincible I ever saw." Stories like this weren't rare. Time after time, the Jumbo proved itself in the most brutal situations, protecting engineers who cleared mines, leading infantry through fortified towns, absorbing fire that would have obliterated any other tank in the American arsenal. And in every case, the Germans reacted with the same shock, the same confusion, the same disbelief that their trusted 88mm guns could fail so completely. The truth is almost tragic. The German crews were not incompetent. Their guns were not weak. Their training was still among the best in the world. What failed them was knowledge. They were fighting a tank they didn't know existed, one that violated everything they had been taught about the Sherman's limits. Had the Germans known the Jumbo had 7 inches of frontal armor, their tactics would have changed. They would have used flanking shots, mines, artillery, or close-range ambushes instead of relying on frontal fire. But in war, ignorance can be fatal, and the Germans learned that lesson 1, battle too late. The Jumbo remained rare until the last days of the conflict, but its influence reached far beyond its small numbers. It changed how American armored units advanced. It shook German confidence in their own weapons, and it proved that sometimes a single unexpected variable can alter the course of a battlefield. When the war finally ended, surviving Jumbos stood in tank parks looking battered and broken, worn down by months of punishment. And yet, beneath the dents and scars, their armor remained intact, silent proof of the role they had played. Crews visiting them would run their hands across the impact marks, remembering every moment when they thought the next hit might be the one that ended them. For the Germans, the revelation came only after surrender. Captured documents, battlefield analysis, and first-hand inspection confirmed the truth. The Americans had fielded a Sherman with armor nearly as thick as a tiger's front. Many German veterans refused to believe it at first. Others simply shook their heads, wondering how such a tank slipped through their intelligence network unnoticed. In the post-war years, historians debated the Jumbo's significance. Some argued it was too few in number to matter. Others pointed at the moments when it absorbed enemy fire long enough for entire units to survive. But among the men who fought beside it, there was no debate at all. They called it the tank that saved lives, the shield that took the beating others could not, the miracle that turned fear into hope at the darkest hours. Its legacy didn't come from destroying enemy armor, it came from enduring it. And that endurance changed everything. In the end, the story of the M4A3E2 Jumbo is not about firepower or speed or the technicalities of armor thickness. It is about misunderstanding, resilience, and the unpredictable ways war punishes assumptions. It is about German 88mm crews discovering too late that the rules they relied on no longer applied. Many machines of war are remembered for their destructive ability, but the Jumbo is remembered for the opposite. It became a legend not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it survived. And in surviving, it rewrote the battlefields of Europe, one shell impact at a time.